Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to make a little sort of note for those of you who don't know about this. In the latter part of the 1970s, I first had the pleasure of working with Don, our next speaker, and I convinced him to do a book project which came out a couple years later called Firearms and Violence. It was an edited book that Don worked very hard on and brought together a number of scholars in history and law and criminology and other fields. And one of the papers, one of the chapters in that book was by a young scholar named Stephen Halbrook. Another one was by a young historian whose name was Joyce Malcolm, and there were others. And those scholars went on to write really the seminal works on this subject. And so I'm really quite indebted to Don for his foresight on many levels. Don himself received his JD from Yale University Law School. He's taught law at Stanford University, St. Louis University, and the University of Melbourne. He's been a civil rights lawyer with William Kunstler in New York and the California Rural Legal Assistance. He's been a trustee for the Poverty Lawyers for Effective Advocacy, a member of the California State Advisory Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. He was Director of Litigation and Deputy Director for the San Mateo Legal Aid Society. He was Police Legal Advisor for the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. He's been a legal consultant to the cities of Seattle, Berkeley, the state of Alaska. His books include Armed, New Perspectives on Gun Control, Restricting Handguns, The Liberal Skeptics Speak Out. I mentioned Firearms and Violence. The Great American Gun Debate with Gary Kleck and others. So I'm delighted to introduce Don Cates.
Let me, as a preliminary note, for those who are interested, I'm going to be giving out a whole lot of facts. Those who are interested in footnotes, I'm such a pedant that when I write a speech, it has footnotes. Anybody who wants can ask David for my email address and write me and ask for this speech, and it'll come to you with the footnotes. Okay. To many people, it seems self-evident that the more guns there are in society, the more violence there will be. But that simply does not accord with the empirical facts. The earliest firm data we have it comes from right after World War II, when gun ownership was quite low, and so was the murder rate. Between 1946 and 2000, gun ownership more than doubled in the United States, that is, per capita. But the murder rate did not double, nor did it go up at all. It actually fell. So much for more guns means more violence, more murder. Neither does this work in Europe. I recently did a study with a Canadian criminologist in which we studied 16 European nations, all the nations we could get the data on gun ownership and murder. And lo and behold, the nations that had the highest gun ownership had only 1/3 the murder rate of the nations that had much lower gun ownership. Now, we did not conclude that more guns mean more criminals get shot and that deters criminals. That may be true. I think it is true in the United States, but it's not true in Europe because people don't keep guns for self-defense a whole lot. The reason more guns meant less murder is really irrelevant to the number of guns. The reason is this: murder and lots of other social pathologies are caused by economic, social phenomena. And there are societies where they have these adverse phenomena and the murder rate rises. And politicians think there is a quick fix: ban guns. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't take guns away from criminals because they don't give up their guns. And if they had no guns, they'd commit crimes with other weapons. So as a result, you ban guns and you don't lower the murder rate. It keeps going up. As a result of that, you have a correlation. The more gun bans you have, the more murders you have. Not because the guns are being banned, but because you haven't done anything about the things which are the real cause of murder. Well, handgun control advises victims of rape and robbery to never resist in any way. Quote, "The way to keep you alive is to put up no defense. Give them what they want or run," unquote. Contrast this opinion to criminological fact. Analyzing a national data set on crime outcomes, Professor Southwick concludes, quote, "The use of a gun by the victim significantly reduces her chance of being injured." Professor Tark, analyzing a different data set of crime outcomes, concludes, quote, "Resistance with a gun appears to be the most effective in preventing serious injury to the victim and the most effective tactic for preventing property loss," unquote. Now, the uniformly anti-gun media harp on the undoubted fact that guns can cause a whole lot of problems and a whole lot of evil, and never mention another fact, which is that 6 times as many victims each year use guns to defend themselves as criminals use guns to commit crime. In other words, guns are 6 times as good as they are harmful. Now, it should be noted that most of these incidents do not involve a shooting. In 80% of the incidents where a victim pulls a gun, the criminal runs away, and that includes criminals who have guns. Now, why is this? Because criminals aren't interested in getting shot. The fact that I shot it out with that victim and he's dead is of little consolation if you're dead. A further problem is that you're much more likely, if you were a criminal, to be dead than a victim, because 85% of victims of shootings recover if you get them to a hospital. Criminals can't go to hospitals. They go to a hospital with a bullet wound. Soon they meet the police. So their chance of dying in a shootout is enormously better. Now, 7-Eleven stores follow handgun control's advice to never resist, always give them what they want. If you want to read horrible stories about women being kidnapped and raped and murdered, all you need to do is Google late night convenience store clerk, and murder. You will find them in horrible and agonizing detail. Contrast a study that I published of incidents of women's armed self-defense. These are all from the year 2004. Eugene, Oregon, June 25, 2004. A convenience store clerk gave the robber all the money she had. When he threatened to kill her unless she gave him more, she pulled out her gun. He ran away. She chased him out of the store, shot his rear window out, and he was shortly captured. Haines City, Florida, August 11. Confronted in her store by two armed robbers, owner Judy Foster shot one and both of them fled. Detroit, April 29. Barbara Holland was returning to the home she shares with her 18-year-old daughter one evening when an armed man knocked her down as she was unlocking her front door and started dragging her into the house. She reported that he looked surprised when she pulled a gun out of her purse and killed him. Springfield, Ohio, March 22nd. Melanie Yancey locked herself in her bedroom when two armed men broke into her home. When they tried breaking down her door, she fired a shot through the door. They fired back, but when she killed one of them, the other one ran away. Spokane, Washington, July 29. When a man broke into her home and attempted to enter her bedroom, Lisa Hanson arrested and held him at gunpoint for police. Nashville, Tennessee, July 19. Two young women hid in a bedroom with a gun when two men broke into their home. When one of the men entered the bedroom, they killed him and the other one fled. All right. There were many more of those incidents, but we have limited time, and I can see people are already going to sleep. All right. The problem with banning guns to everyone is obvious. The kind of people you need to take guns away from don't obey gun laws. So all the gun laws end up doing is disarming the victims who aren't a problem. It's important to know how gun ban advocates answer this problem. They lie. Scores of scholarly studies say, well, yes, there's burglary and rape and robbery, and those crimes are committed by criminals. But most murders are committed by ordinary, previously law-abiding people because they had a gun. That's a peculiarity of those articles, is that they never cite any references. They've got footnotes for everything else, but not for that. And the reason they don't is that there are no references. Crime studies, going back as far as we have them, to the 1890s, show that law-abiding, responsible citizens, adults, do not murder, simply do not murder. Law-abiding, responsible citizens, adults, do not commit violent crimes. They do not murder. And study after study after study shows that. I am not familiar with any study that shows different. Let me cite a few of these studies. Only 15% of Americans have criminal records. Roughly 90% of adult murderers have adult records with an average crime career of 6 or more years, including 4 major felonies, and that's without accounting for their juvenile records. Among juvenile murderers, psychological studies find 80 to 100% are psychotic or have psychotic symptoms. A New York Times study of murders there in the years 2003 through 2005 found, quote, more than 90% of the killers had criminal records, unquote. In a Kennedy School study in Massachusetts, quote, some 95% of homicide offenders had been arraigned at least once in Massachusetts before they murdered. On average, homicide offenders had been arraigned for 9 previous offenses, unquote. Of Illinois murder, well, I can go on and on and on with this crap, but you're probably pretty tired, so I shall not bore you with more of it. Although anybody who's not tired can ask questions about it, and I'll read about the notion that murderers are criminals, are ordinary law-abiding people. When you pin these people down and force them to provide some evidence, here is the evidence they provide. Invariably, it is that most murders occur between acquaintances, and many of them are in homes and in the course of arguments. Apparently, the notion of these people is that criminals don't have homes or acquaintances or arguments. In fact, the one national study that studied murders committed with handguns in homes among acquaintances found that the reason these people knew each other was because of, quote, previous illegal transactions. In other words, if you keep a home with lots of drugs in it, people are going to come into your home to steal your drugs and steal your money, and they're going to murder you, or you're going to murder them. And that's just the way it happens. Well, actually, if you kill them, it's probably not murder. All right, that's about all I have to say at this point. But before closing, I want to say something about Steve Halbrook. I have been learning stuff about the Second Amendment from Steve since the 1980s, maybe 1970s. He is the definitive authority. This book, if you want entertainment reading, no, this is not your book. If you want to know everything about how the Founding Fathers passed the Second Amendment and what they thought about the right to arms, this is a book, your book. I have written in the last few weeks 2 law review articles and about the Second Amendment. And in writing those law review articles, I went through this book and took countless things out of it that I hadn't known. I'm an expert on the Second Amendment, and I still didn't know anywhere near all the stuff that Steve has in this book, and I strongly urge you to buy it if you're interested in the subject. Thank you.